Hello, this is Barry Shaw, The View from Israel. Now, those of you who have been following my video travels throughout Europe, exploring the root causes of the social fragmentation of European countries, bringing with it the consequential rise of anti-Semitism and its effect on the attitudes against Israel, both at street level, at academic level, and also at government level, will have been impressed by the same phenomena repeating itself wherever I go. And I want to thank all of you who contacted me as a result of the video and my conversations I had with my special guest in Sweden last time. And your comments and experiences simply add and impact the conclusions of my research. Now, today, I want to get to views of a non-Jewish political scientist, as opposed to the lady I spoke to who was the head of the WITSO in Sweden. Someone with a background in Swedish intelligence, someone who was intimately involved in left-wing politics, a personal involvement at the political life of the country, to share with me his perspectives, which will maybe rid me of some of my conceptions, or will he, in fact, solidify my conclusions about the state of Sweden and the direction it's taking. Johan Westerholm has written about his concerns for Sweden. He's also authored a book about Islamism in Sweden, and of all things, the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood in Sweden. Johan Westerholm was awarded this year with the Civil Rights Prize established by the civil rights movements in Sweden. Johan Westerholm, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Barry.
What surprised me about your bio, Johan, was that you were a member of the Social Democratic Workers' Party. And it seems to me that in Sweden, the Social Democrats are very similar to the British Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, very much on the far left, and also in collusion with the Islamists who hate Israel, and both were vehemently anti-Semitic. And to cement the relationship, at the Labour Party annual conferences, the Palestinian flag filled the rooms of the Labour Party annual conference, no Union Jacks there, when Corbyn was the head of the party. Now, tell me a bit about your move from the Social Democrat Party to where you are today.
Actually, I entered the party in the beginning of this century. After leaving the intelligence service for good, then I figured that I might be able to be a part of trying to change the society, and the only way to change the society is from within, from the inside of a party. And what you can call me, I'm an old school social democrat, more like Swedish politician Tage Erlander, who had a very, very close relationship to the state of Israel, and identified himself as a friend of Israel. And Mr. Göran Persson, who was really a good, big friend of the state of Israel, and he was actually one of the founding fathers of the International Holocaust Remembrance Center, and that's what my kind of social democracy, actually. And then I entered the party, and I in 2019 I finally gave up. Actually, I'm still a social democrat, but I haven't changed. But the party has changed to a more pro-Islamistic and pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas kind of policy. So in 2019, I just gave up, and I wrote my book about the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamism in Sweden, where too sadly, actually, the Social Democratic Party has been one of the enablers, so to say, for the Muslim Brotherhood to establish themselves in Sweden in such a great manner, actually. And they are having a big impact on Swedish politics in general, and the Social Democrat, and not to mention the Greens in particular. So that's actually my my how I developed over the years, and this is the short version.
Yeah, before we come on to what I call the Red-Green Alliance, let's just discuss the Nordic resistance movement. Because in Sweden, this Nordic resistance movement is considered by many as a neo-Nazi party that targets Jews. I mean, for instance, there have been demonstrations by these people targeted Jews on Yom Kippur. They clearly want to rid Sweden of its Jews, which is strange, really, because I think the number of Jews in Sweden is probably less than 29,000, and virtually all of them are fully integrated and assimilated and feel themselves to be native Swedes at the time, which may not be true of the same of a lot of the migrants that have come here. But anyway, that's one thing. But I understand that the Nordic resistance movement has now registered itself as a political party in Sweden, and it has growing links with the centre-right Swedish Democrats. So how would you rate the standing or legitimacy of the Nordic resistance movement, which is a Scandinavian one, but as far as the Swedish branch is concerned, in mainstream politics in Sweden?
I think that the Nordic resistance movement has a fairly low impact on politics. Actually, they are the Secret Service or the security police. They say that there's a roughly 1,000 plus minus 200 maybe active participants in the movement, and they're well known. On the political level, they have not so much impact, of course, through the Sverigedemokraterna, this center-right nationalistic party we have in the parliament. But they're fairly well known. The problem with the resistance movement, they have very, very close to violence, actually. I have, as a journalist, I made an investigation on them, and I can tell you this, that this lot, the neo-Nazi lot, they are really, really close to violence. That was one of the not scary but unpleasant experiences that I've had the recent years, having threats put on me and pictures of weapons, and you should look, you should watch your back and so forth. So, but they're around 1,000, but they're very, very close to violence, domestic violence, actually. On the other side, we have the Islamistic movements, and they are not close to that close to domestic violence at all. On the contrary, actually, they are not interested in using violence as a political method or a political tool in Sweden. But they are recruiting and they're inspiring youngsters to enroll in the Islamic State. A couple of years ago, we had big problems with that. But they're not at all close to violence in that sense. But nevertheless, they are, according to in my point of view, they are a greater threat to Swedish democracy and European stability than the Nordic resistance movement. That's my opinion. And I would say that the French legislation and the German legislation, they are really addressing this kind of threat in a very, very effective way. But we are not in Sweden.
Tell me then, should, for instance, the centre-right Swedish Democrats come to power in Sweden, what would you consider the influence of the Nordic resistance movement be in that party? Would you think that their influence would take that centre-right party more to the far right, or isn't that influence that strong politically in Sweden?
I would say the Nordic resistance movement, I think they are so unpopular in a popular vote So the Sweden Democrats, those in the Sweden Democrats who have sympathies with the national resistance movement, well, they're smart enough not to push their agenda, so to say. I would say, well, you can trace it, but I don't think it will have any more measurable impact, actually.
Okay, so Johan, tell me about that poster behind you. And while you're doing it, tell me about the symbiotic link between the Social Democrats, the left-wing parties in Sweden, and the growing radical Muslim and Islamists in Sweden.
Actually, the poster behind me is the cover of my book, The Islamism in Sweden, which looks like this. It's translated in Norwegian, and it has also a French translation, and I'm working on an English translation. It describes actually the links between the Islamistic ideology, I would say. Islamism has very, very little to do with Islam as a religion. From my point of view, Islamism is actually an ideology with the roots in the 30s, connections with the Nazi Party, the German Nazi Party, and after the war in 1960s, they started to collaborate with East Germany, the Soviet Union, and they were inspired by this post-Marxist movement. So that's why we have the serpent, the star, and the hammer, and on the background of what the colors of most Arabic states' flags, and the red, of course, symbolizing the communist roots, actually. And I use the same colors, actually. The base for the poster is that we used in the black, the white, and the red. And then the green came as a symbol for Islam or Islamist, or Islam as actually one of the ideologies forming Islamism. And but the red, the white, and the black is actually the really, really strong. And Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels used those colors when communicating the Nazi ideology. It's strong for the eye and raises emotions. So that's the poster behind it. It's the cover of my book, actually.
Not having read the book, I don't know where you stand on this, because my research shows me that in fact the coalition that you have, what I call the Red-Green Alliance between the far left Marxists of any Western government and the rise of Islamism that has been a result of the mass migration from the Middle East, is an alliance where they, both of them together with their different causes, are really there in order to bring down the traditional democratic values of Western countries and replace it, well, with what? Because at the end of the day, there is no alliance between Marxism, communism on the one hand, and the hegemony, jihadi aim of Islamists. So although they cooperate right now, it is basically into destroy and disrupt democratic traditions of the West. We even see this, quite frankly, played out in the United States within the Democrat Party today. But do you find that this sort of symbiotic, unholy alliance taking place and growing in Sweden right now?
Very, very much so. I would say both the far left movement and the Islamist movement, they are very, very heavily inspired by Frantz Fanon, the Algerian political theorist, and actually the letters between the Frantz Fanon and Ali Shariati in the beginning of the 60s And it led to one example, that form. It was the ideology that actually led to the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Ali Shariati is described as the architect of the Iranian Revolution. But on the other hand, this Frantz Fanon, he also inspired the 68 student movement and the student riots in Paris, 1968, and in particular the World the conference, the World Church's conference in Uppsala in Sweden in 1968. That's where the far left got into religion, got into the Swedish church, and somewhat started to attract the Islamistic movement. So right now we have, what you say, is this unholy alliance between Islamists, Christian on the very, very far left in Sweden and in Norway. Actually, no, I've been studying Norway for some reason, some of them obvious and some not, and the Islamist movement, because this Frantz Fanon, he also inspired the post-colonial parts of the Islamistic movement, and very, very much his theories actually completed the theories of Hassan al-Banna and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, and their opinion about the right for the state of Israel to exist as a natural home for the Jews, and also how they look upon violence as a political tool. I can say that the Muslim Brotherhood, they cooperated with Adolf Hitler during the Holocaust and the Second World War, and out of the ruins of from the ruins of the Second World War and the Holocaust, only one movement survived, and it was the Muslim Brotherhood. Now we can see, we can experience a political power, a political movement, which Europe has never seen before, where we have Extinction Rebellion, we have other groups on the far left, and we have Islamist movements actually collaborating and cooperating. And we can see it as a result. One of the results I've found is that the riots in the Gothenburg top level meeting, where George W. Bush, the president of the United States, had a meeting with the Swedish Prime Minister, Mr. Göran Persson. We had riots in Gothenburg we've never seen before. And the official investigation, they never actually concluded what was the roots of these riots and insurgencies, and how did it come to this, and why did we have the Palestinian support groups cooperating with the extreme environmentalists. And they didn't really see that coming, and they didn't really, not even in the later analysis, that they found that natural in any way. But in my research, I found their own the far left's own analysis of the Gothenburg riots in 2001, and it's written mainly by a German citizen. His name is Tadzio Müller, and he wrote a report in 2004, and he actually concluded that the riots in 2001 was a great success, because it was the first time all these independent groups, some coming from the Muslim Brotherhood cluster, and some from the environmental cluster, and some from the clusters from the far left, it was the first time where they cooperated, actually.
Yeah, I was intrigued actually by, I looked it up after I noticed you'd written about it, the connection between which I found absolutely staggering, between the Muslim Brotherhood and the connection to the Swedish church. And I read of somebody called Archbishop Antti Jackelin. I don't know if I pronounced the name right, but what could you tell me about this particular Archbishop?
She's Antje Jacqueline. You pronounce it really, really well. Antje Jacqueline. She's born in Germany, and she has a background as a professor in the United States after she was appointed to be a priest. But she has a background living in the cluster of the former East Germany, Deutsche Demokratische Republik. And her husband was an informant to the Stasi. And she has very, very clearly being on the Marxist side, opinion-wise. And her research points out that she has sympathies with on the Marxist side, and the one who appointed her priest, actually, in the, I think, in the 70s or 80s, early 80s, was then a chairman for the Friendship Alliance between Sweden and East Germany. He was the bishop in Stockholm who appointed her as a priest. So she has this very strong linking historically, and I would say that she's not the main person responsible for the development of the Swedish Church. It's one of her predecessors, the former Archbishop K.G. Hammar, and because he really pointed out this direction for the Swedish Church, how to develop the Swedish Church, and clearly a left-wing development. And I would recommend you to interview Mr. Johan Sundén, associate professor. He has written a book about this development, actually, of the Swedish Church, where you have clearly left-wing opinions how to interpret the Bible, for example. We have one bishop in the middle of Sweden, he's emeritus right now, he got into retirement. But many years ago he said that, the way to paradise, to all Christians' paradise or heaven, the Chinese Cultural Revolution shows us the way. And he then got to be a bishop in the Swedish Church. So we have this clearly left-wing sympathies. They try to interpret the Bible from a left-wing post-Marxist perspective, and with that, it quite naturally follows the sympathies of the BDS movement, the sympathies of the Kairos Declaration. You have other movements or clusters moving into this in this direction, actually. And I consider it is a big problem for Sweden right now. Maybe 50% of Swedes are still members of the Swedish Church, and they have a really, really great impact on Swedish opinions and Swedish lives and so forth. I have left the Swedish Church since many years, just as an effect of this.
Well, I'll tell you, Johan, how I answer this, because I had to confront this several years ago, because this archbishop and people like her represent what's called replacement theology. They belong to a branch of Christianity which they feel they have to replace the Jew based on their misconception, I would put it, of biblical renderings. And they so detest Judaism out of a desire of this that we used to have, it's not going on any longer, several years, every year at Christmas time, and we're coming into Christmas periods right now in Bethlehem of all places. There used to be a conference over there based on the Kairos doctrine, in which Christians, like, for instance, your Archbishop and maybe certain members of other Jewish Christian churches, came together with the Palestinians and had an absurd event in Bethlehem at Christmas time called Christ at the Checkpoint. They, in fact, replaced the image of Jesus into a Palestinian refugee. They seem to have forgotten the founding faith of Jesus in what I call the faithless message, which was ridiculous, basically, because Bethlehem is one of the places that they call occupied, but in fact, Israel left Bethlehem, gave it, if you like, to the Palestinians to run. And since then, Bethlehem has been one of the centers of Palestinian terrorism. They used to come out of Bethlehem, and the distance, if you know it, isn't very far to Jerusalem, or even from Kiryat Arba, where they perpetrated the most ghastly terror events, meaning Israel had to put up some security fence as they left the areas that Israel had given to the Palestinians in order to protect ourselves from people like gunmen and Palestinian suicide bombers. But the last point that you could use, by the way, happened just last week, in which Sweden was one of the countries that voted and supported for a United Nations General Assembly resolution which designated the Temple Mount in the heart of Jerusalem as an exclusively Muslim holy place. Now, I would have thought any archbishop would have been in uproar against the Swedish government voting for some resolution. But it seems you have some Christian leaders who would accept that in their pursuit of lining up with the Palestinians against Israel, the Jewish state. There is an insanity there. Maybe you can explain it, because I quite frankly can't.
Well, this resolution, actually, it is quite natural. I wasn't surprised at all, actually. Disappointed, of course, but not surprised. The Archbishop is very, very closely linked to former Secretary of State or Foreign Minister, Miss Margot Wallström. Miss Margot Wallström, as probably most of your this channel's viewers know, she got the Simon Wiesenthal Center appointment for quote having the 8th worst anti-Semitic quote in 2019 or 2018, when she actually accused Israel, the state of Israel, for performing extrajudicial killings, actually, or something like that. And she has Miss Margot Wallström. She's very, very close to Palestinian Authority and Mahmoud Abbas. Close relationship, actually, close friendly. They're close friends. And Miss Margot Wallström is actually seen on several pictures, and she has a very, very heavy engagement in the Swedish church, where Miss Margot Wallström and Antje Jackelén, they are considered to be very, very close friends. So I would say that you talk about this, what the Swedish has now as a new theology. They replaced this replacement theology. I have to emphasize once again that Miss Antje Jackelén is not responsible for this replacement theology. It's K.G. Hammar, one of her predecessors, who actually brought this new way of looking at the Bible into the Swedish church. Is just logic. So I'm not surprised. I'm just disappointed. I'm glad that I left the Swedish church so I don't have to defend it, because I think it's, well, unspeakable.
You know, also, I recently made a video where we called The Hybrid Nature of Terrorism, in which we responded to a lot of criticism, particularly also including that coming from the Swedish government, about the Israeli Defense Ministry and the Israeli government designating 6 so-called Palestinian human rights NGOs as terror organization. It's a detailed video, and I would advise our viewers to go on YouTube and look for the hybrid nature of terrorism that I produced together with a guest, Maurice Hirsch, which we gave in great detail the intricate links between NGOs that have been funded by both Swedish government, Swedish charity organizations, things like this, that are deeply embedded with the Palestinian Front of the Liberation of Palestine as one internationally designated terror organization. Why I come onto this is because I understand you have sort of intelligence and information about funding given to Palestinians, maybe Palestinian in the name of human rights causes, but actually going towards terrorism. I think you could maybe talk about Islamic Relief and perhaps the Muslim Aid and things like this that are operating within Sweden.
That's a big problem. We have, Sweden is known for its very, very generous funding of civil society. And the foreign aid, or the whole foreign aid complex. And over the years, mainly under Ms. Karin Jämtin, she's now head of the Swedish foreign aid authority, SIDA. This is actually, I would say it's a new direction for Swedish foreign aid, where Sweden has replaced much of what the Red Crescent actually did in terms of foreign aid or the supporting catastrophes and stuff like that. And now the Swedish Foreign Aid Agency, the SIDA, they are relying on Islamic Relief Worldwide and Islamic Relief Sweden. And Islamic Relief is, as we all know, a part of the cluster of Muslim Brotherhood through personal unions and other things. And Sweden has a really, really big or large impact on Islamic Relief because Sweden is one of the largest and most important cash providers for Islamic Relief. And that's why we have the former head of Islamic Relief Worldwide was Lamia El Amri. She had to resign for enabling anti-Semitic opinions within the organization. But the day after she resigned from the chair, she was reappointed as vice chair. And she's also heading the Swedish organization Islamic Relief. And they are actually, with Swedish tax money, they are funding Islamic Relief Worldwide with some, more or less between 30 or $50 million US dollars per annum. And it's increasing. So it is a big problem. And what we have seen in Islamic Relief and the other organizations within the Muslim Brotherhood cluster in Sweden, we have seen how individuals that they kind of move from this cluster and they move directly into the Islamic State terrorist organization.
Johan, I have to tell you, I come out of this conversation with you quite content that you and I are singing from the same song sheet. I identify completely with your point of view. I'm very happy to hear that because I thought we would have issues of differences of opinion here, but I don't find any at all. I think you and I have to find a way in which we educate the Swedish people about the misuse of their tax money going into, they think, Palestinian NGOs, where their money is being channeled specifically to non-legitimate causes, including propaganda, incitement of their children and women, and also into actually directly going into the coffers of a internationally designated terror organization. I think we have a lot of work that we can combine on there. Is there anything that you want to add or you want our listeners or viewers to know about before we wrap up?
The big problem actually today, where I and some scholars or researchers we are studying in for, is that all this financing and how government funding or government money or my money, my tax money, actually is funding this kind of organization, and it's really, really hard to describe, because everything is now covered under the umbrella of foreign aid. And foreign aid, according to most legislations, actually is a part of every nation's or every state's foreign policy, and is therefore guarded by a lot of regulation. I'm not allowed to have all the information, all account information. So what I would like, I know you have qualified readers, that on a personal level, I would need actually every help, how to track the money and track the funding, actually, in order just to be able to limit it in the future. So I'm actually asking for help, for your viewers' help to track it. And I'm limited within Sweden, but if you guys find anything in your home country, in Israel, or in neighboring countries or other Western countries, please contact me. I would be most glad to have all the information I can get right now.
I think one way that we could make this work, Johan, is that if you over there in Sweden can create an NGO for financial accountability for the charity money or government money going into, for instance, as we said, Palestinian NGOs is one, but we over here in Israel, through the work done over here by organizations called NGO Monitor, by Palestine Media Watch, by my organization, Israel Institute of Strategic Studies, we can give you the accounting of where that money is being used for and where it's disappearing into, and you will be horrified to find out how much of your Swedish citizens' money are going directly into the coffers of, again, I repeat, an internationally designated terror organization. And I think we need an organization over there in Sweden, perhaps headed by you, in order to bring the facts and figures to your accountability, to your government departments and representatives over there, and even create maybe a grassroots movement of Swedes demanding to know that their money is going legitimately to proper human rights or whatever needs is required over here, and not disappearing down a rabbit hole under the visible title of Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I think that's one way we can work together. My other thing before thanking you, Johan, is I want you to let me know as soon as your book has an English translation, and I'll be very happy to have you on another show to talk about it.
Well, thank you, Barry. Thank you very much.
Again, Johan Westerholm, thank you very much for joining me. And viewers, if you're watching this video, I ask you to do one thing. Please go to the button on YouTube, subscribe, because if we get minimum of 100 people pressing the subscribe button for free, it means that we can make a video link have its own specific title, The View from Israel. And we need, according to YouTube rules and regulations, a number of minimum 100 people pressing the subscribe button. It's free to do so, and please also share this video that we're making here today. Thank you for joining me. This is Barry Shaw from The View from Israel.